There's a lot of discussion about how to maximize your sear when you're done sous videing your food. But do you even need to sear? I'm going to dive into that question coming up next on Amazing Food Made Easy. Hey there, I'm Jason Logsdon for Amazing Food Made Easy and president of the International Sous Vide Association, and today I want to talk about whether or not you actually have to sear after sous vide. A lot of people are curious, do you need to sear food or do you not need to sear food, and when is it important and when is it not? And to me, a lot of it comes down to preference. There's a lot of different types of food out there, and giving a sear on it accomplishes several things. So I want to talk about that so you can decide whether or not you should sear your food next time. For most sous vide food, searing does matter, and it's best to sear afterwards to maximize the flavor. That's because searing does a few things. First, it makes it look a lot better. If you've pulled out a piece of meat out of the sous vide bag, it's kind of gray, it doesn't look fantastic. Putting a sear on it adds some great visual cues, and it looks a lot more appealing and a lot more just appetizing and something that you're ready to dive into. Searing also helps add some texture to the outside of the food. This can be in the form of the crust, that is nice and golden brown and crunchy, but also toughens the outside of the food a little bit, which gives it a variation in texture. Having a little bit of a chewiness on the outside of a steak is actually not a bad thing. These variations in texture can help make it taste more appealing to our palates, especially when we're used to more traditionally cooked foods. So to me, those are the two big reasons on why you want to sear food in any type of cooking, but especially with sous vide. It's to make it look better, and then it's to give it a variation in texture on the outside. So you can apply that to any type of cut that you're cooking to decide you really need to sear this after sous vide. You know, if I am cooking a steak for me and I've been lazy and things just got backed up, I don't always sear it because it might just be a weeknight dinner and I don't have time to dry it off, heat up another pan, and I'm just hungry and want to get it into my belly. And it tastes just fine. It tastes great. Sous vide food turns out amazing every time, even if you don't take these extra steps to maximize your flavor. But if I'm doing a nice dinner for my wife and I, then I'm definitely going to sear that sous vide ribeye that I put that time and energy into because I want it to look beautiful on the plate and it's something special. I want to go the extra mile just to make sure that everything is maximized. One big category of food that I almost never sear is food for stir fries. So I make a lot of sous vide chicken, a lot of sous vide pork or sous vide steak, and then I will cook in the sous vide machine, and then I will make a stir fry on the side. So stir fried vegetables, sauce, get it all together, and I'll just throw in the meat at the end. Especially if the meat is just a part of the stir fry or it's a saucier stir fry or a curry, then I'm probably not going to take the time to sear the meat. Sure, it adds a little bit of extra flavor to the outside, but it's just an extra pan that I have to clean, and it's not going to be really noticeable in the grand scheme of things when I'm making food for my wife and I for a regular meal. If I'm a Michelin star chef, then sure, I'm going to sear it to maximize that texture and maximize the flavor. But I don't think most people are going to be able to tell if you have seared beef or just sous vide beef in your stir fry. So I'll just cut it up and I'll throw it into the stir fry in the last minute and heat it through and it's ready to eat. People want to know if you have to sear sous vide chicken, and that's a really big one. A lot of times the chicken doesn't look great coming out of the bag. So if you are serving it, finding that balance between stringy chicken on the outside that's a little bit golden brown or tender, moist chicken that goes all the way through without having a sear on it, I tend to err on the side of I want it to be juicy. I want it to be perfectly cooked, whole on a pile of vegetables or some rice. Then you probably want to give it a sear or give it a torch so there's a little bit of color on there. Otherwise, it just looks a little grody, a little disgusting. But if you're going to cut it up, if you're going to use it in a salad, if you're using it for lunches, a lot of times I won't sear it. And that's because it's hard to get a good sear on chicken. It starts to get really tough really quickly. And so I oftentimes won't give it that much of a sear, or I'll just pull out my torch to give it a little bit of color, but you're not adding the actual caramelization on the outside as much. People always want to know, do you have to sear your sous vide fish? And that's another one that really depends on your presentation. What are you trying to emulate? If you're trying to emulate a pan-fried salmon and you want that crunch and the crisp on it, then you're going to have to sear it. And it can be hard because it's going to be tender coming out of the bag, and you don't want to overcook it because it's already perfectly cooked. So it can be hard to sear fish in a good way that doesn't raise the temperature. But if you're trying to emulate poached fish or steamed fish, then you really don't have to sear it because what you're emulating doesn't have a sear with it. You don't poach fish that has a crunchy crust on the outside of it. And that's why when it comes to sous vide fish, a lot of times I recommend focusing on steamed or poached preparations. Because sous vide is great at mastering those, where it's not as good as replicating a pan-fried or a grilled type of fish that has a nice crust and texture on the outside of it. Another category of food that you have to worry about a sear with is fatty food. This can be anything from a ribeye or a pork chop that has fat on the outside. At most sous vide temperatures, unless you're going into the braise-like range, you're not rendering the fat. And so for a lot of these, you do want to put at least some kind of sear on to really render a little bit of that fat and make it a little more palatable. For instance, for sous vide pork, a lot of pork chops, you might not even notice if you don't put a sear on it. It almost tastes like a pork loin then. But if you have that fat cap on the outside and you just leave it sous vide without any coloring or any kind of rendering in a pan, it's going to be chewier. It's going to be not nearly as kind of melt in your mouth as it can be if you give it a good sear. So now the next time you've cooked your food and you say, do I really need to sear this after the sous vide process? You have a good idea on how to answer that for the specific circumstances you're in. Till next time, I'm Jason Logston.